When survival alone is uncertain, purpose becomes more vital, not less. The conversation continues past midnight, meandering through backgrounds, experiences, views on Roosevelt's programs, favorite radio shows, books recently read. It's the longest, most engaging interaction you've had with someone outside work in years. We should continue this sometime, Sophie suggests as the party winds down. Maybe dinner. There's a little Italian place downtown where the cook is from my parents' village, almost like home cooking. The invitation surprises you, not just the specifics, but the very concept of social engagement beyond necessity. The Depression has narrowed life to survival for so long that normal human activities, dates, restaurant meals, conversations without economic subtext seem almost foreign. But you accept setting a date for the following weekend. It's another small step toward rebuilding a life rather than merely surviving, like renting the house, like saving money, like putting down roots in Phoenix. September brings more international news. In Germany, the Nuremberg rally showcases Nazi power with unprecedented spectacle. In Italy, Mussolini prepares for war with Ethiopia, seeking colonial conquest to distract from domestic troubles. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's purges intensify, eliminating real and imagined opposition. The world seems to be dividing into increasingly hostile camps. Democracies struggling with economic recovery versus dictatorships embracing militarism and expansionism. The connections to the Depression are direct and undeniable. Economic collapse has empowered extremists. Discredited democratic capitalism pushed nations toward nationalism and aggression. Yet America's path remains distinct. Despite similar pressures, despite radical elements on both left and right, the political system has bent but not broken. Roosevelt's reforms have been revolutionary but constitutional, radical but democratic. The contrast becomes clearer when news arrives of an attempted coup in the United States, the business plot, a supposed conspiracy by wealthy industrialists to overthrow Roosevelt and establish a fascist regime modelled on Mussolini's Italy. The plot, exposed by Marine General Smedley Butler, appears to have been more talk than action, but its very existence is chilling. Could have gone that way easy, comments a fellow foreman over lunch one day. People were desperate enough. If we'd gotten a Huey Long type instead of Roosevelt, who knows? Huey Long, the Louisiana senator whose Share Our Wealth program proposed radical redistribution, has become increasingly vocal in criticizing Roosevelt from the left, pushing for more dramatic action against poverty and inequality. His populist message resonates with millions still struggling despite the New Deal's efforts. The political tensions reflect broader questions about America's future. How much should government intervene in the economy? How should wealth be distributed? What balance between individual liberty and collective welfare? The Depression has forced these questions into public discourse, made theoretical debates immediate and practical. As 1934 progresses toward winter, the recovery continues its slow, uneven pace. The worst seems over, but normalcy remains distant. Unemployment has dropped but remains above 20%. Some industries approach pre-crash production levels, while others languish. Some regions experience growth while others stagnate. For you personally, life has stabilized. Your position at the construction company is secure, your wage is good, your small house comfortable if modest. Your friendship with Sophie has deepened, weekend dinners becoming regular, conversations extending into shared activities, hikes in the desert, community concerts, occasional films. It's not the life you imagined before the crash, not New York, not rapid advancement in business, not material abundance, but it has elements absent from those early ambitions: purpose, community, resilience tested and proven. The Depression has reshaped not just economics, but consciousness, individual and collective. Values have shifted, priorities reordered, assumptions challenged. Material success seems less certain, less central. Interdependence is recognized rather than denied. Government's role has expanded not through abstract ideology, but practical necessity. Whether these changes will endure beyond the crisis remains uncertain. Whether the New Deal represents temporary emergency measures or permanent transformation is still debated. Whether democracy can solve the problems of industrial capitalism or will give way to more authoritarian alternatives is an open question. But sitting on the porch of your small Phoenix house as 1934 draws to a close, listening to Roosevelt's fireside chat on the radio, you feel something that's been absent for years. Not optimism exactly, but a cautious faith in possibility, in resilience, in the capacity to rebuild from ruins. The Great Depression isn't over. Its global consequences continue to unfold in increasingly dangerous ways, but its power to destroy has been contained, its worst effects mitigated, its challenges met with creativity and determination, if not perfect solutions. And on an individual level, you've survived. Not unchanged, not unscathed, but intact. Carrying lessons that will shape whatever comes next, whatever form recovery eventually takes. 1935 arrives with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The worst seems over. Bank failures have largely stopped. Industrial production is slowly increasing. Unemployment has dropped from catastrophic to merely severe. But new tensions emerge as Roosevelt's programs face their first serious challenges. In January, the Supreme Court strikes down a key component of the National Industrial Recovery Act, ruling that the federal government overstepped its authority in regulating industries. "So much for the Blue Eagle," remarks a fellow foreman at the construction company, referring to the NRA symbol that had been displayed proudly in compliant businesses across America. The decision represents the beginning of a constitutional showdown between Roosevelt and the court. Additional New Deal programs face similar challenges, raising questions about whether the reforms will survive judicial review. For ordinary Americans, these legal battles have immediate consequences. When the NRA is invalidated, some businesses immediately cut wages and increase hours. Others maintain the standards voluntarily, recognizing the benefits of higher wages for consumer spending and labor peace. Your company falls in the latter category, maintaining wages and hours not from altruism, but practicality. Change the rules again and we lose half the workforce, Mr. Sullivan acknowledges grudgingly. Besides, government contracts still require the standards. Your relationship with Sophie deepens through these early months of 1935. Weekend dinners become more regular, conversations more personal. She shares stories of her childhood in an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn, of her parents' struggles and sacrifices, of her determination to become educated despite cultural expectations that women marry young. "My father wanted me to find a husband at 18, she tells you over pasta one evening. When I said I wanted college instead, he didn't speak to me for a month, but my mother, she'd secretly saved money from her seamstress work, enough for my first year's tuition. And your father came around, you ask." Sophie laughs. "Not exactly, but when I got my teaching certificate and started sending money home during the Depression, suddenly education seemed more practical than he'd thought." These personal histories, how families navigated cultural expectations, economic necessities, individual aspirations, form connections deeper than casual dating. The Depression has made such sharing more common, more necessary. When material possessions are scarce, relationships, memories, and experiences become the true currencies of life. March brings the launch of the Works Progress Administration, the most ambitious New Deal program yet. Unlike earlier efforts focused on specific sectors or temporary relief, the WPA aims to provide meaningful employment for millions across a vast range of projects. Building infrastructure, creating art, documenting history, teaching skills, preserving environments. The impact in Phoenix is immediate and visible. Construction projects break ground across the city, a new library downtown, road improvements, flood control systems along the Salt River. Artists receive commissions for murals in public buildings. Writers document local histories and folklore. Musicians perform free concerts in parks. Sophie's adult education program expands significantly, moving from makeshift classrooms in church basements to dedicated spaces in WPA-built community centers. Her students include not just migrants learning English, but local adults seeking literacy, vocational training, continuing education. It's not just teaching them to read, she explains excitedly one evening. It's showing them that learning doesn't stop, that they deserve knowledge as much as anyone, that their minds matter. You should see their faces when they read their first complete sentence on their own. Her enthusiasm reminds you of the Depression's paradoxical impacts, devastating in material terms but transformative in other ways, forcing reconsiderations of value, of purpose, of what constitutes meaningful work and meaningful life. The construction company continues to thrive on government contracts. Your position as shop foreman secure and respected. You're able to send regular money to your parents in Chicago now, even save for what once seemed an impossible luxury, a car of your own. In April, you make the purchase, a used 1931 Ford Model A, not new or flashy, but mechanically sound, and, crucially, yours. The freedom it represents is significant after years of dependence on buses, borrowed rides, and your own 2 feet. Your first real drive is taking Sophie to Tempe for a picnic along the Salt River. The day is perfect, warm but not hot, the desert in spring bloom with unexpected colour. You spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree, share simple food, cheese, bread, fruit, a bottle of wine that represents a genuine splurge. I never thought I'd have this again, Sophie says, gazing at the flowing water, the mountains in the distance. The river, you ask, confused. No. She smiles. Peace, security, the luxury of a day without worry about tomorrow. The sentiment resonates deeply. The Depression's most profound impact hasn't been material deprivation, but psychological trauma, the constant anxiety, the inability to plan, the sense that disaster lurks around every corner. A day without that weight feels miraculous. May brings international news that shatters such peaceful moments. Hitler has publicly renounced the Treaty of Versailles and announced German rearmament. The direct connection between economic disaster and military aggression becomes undeniable. Germany was already secretly rebuilding its military, explains Heinrich, the German refugee, during a dinner at your house where he and Ava join you and Sophie, but now they do it openly, proudly. The Depression made this possible, created the anger, the resentment, the desperate people looking for someone to blame. Could it have happened here, Sophie asks? Could America have turned to a dictator? The question hangs heavy in the air. The business plot, Huey Long's growing populism, Father Coughlin's inflammatory radio broadcasts targeting Jews and foreigners. America has its own demagogues, its own radical movements born of economic desperation. Roosevelt saved you, Eva says quietly. Not perfect, not solving everything, but enough to keep hope alive. Germany had no such leader when we needed one most. The conversation turns to fascism's spread. Italy preparing to invade Ethiopia, Japan expanding in China, right-wing movements gaining strength across Europe. The world seems to be dividing into 2 camps, one embracing militaristic nationalism as the answer to economic woes, the other struggling to preserve democracy while addressing capitalism's failures. In June, the Wagner Act passes, guaranteeing workers' rights to unionize and bargain collectively. It's another transformation in American labor relations, explicitly protecting activities that were once routinely suppressed by violence. Organizers approach your construction company again, more confidently this time, with clear legal backing. The response from management is less hostile than before, resigned to the new reality. By August, a majority of workers have signed union cards, triggering a representation election that the union wins easily. Your position as foreman places you in a complicated middle ground, part of management but sympathetic to labor. When contract negotiations begin, both sides seek your input, value your perspective as someone who understands both production requirements and worker concerns. The resulting agreement represents a genuine compromise, wage increases and improved safety measures balanced against productivity commitments and a no-strike pledge for the contract's duration. It's not perfect for either side, but workable for both, a microcosm of the broader social contract being renegotiated across America. International tensions continue to build through summer and fall. Italy invades Ethiopia in October, using poison gas against civilians, claiming colonial conquest as a right of great nations. The League of Nations issues condemnations but takes no meaningful action. First Japan in Manchuria, now Italy in Ethiopia, comments Paul during Sunday dinner at his and Margaret's small house. Invade your neighbour, face no consequences. What message does that send to Hitler? The question is rhetorical but prescient. The failure to check aggression in Asia and Africa is establishing dangerous precedents for Europe. Economic nationalism is evolving into military expansionism, with powerful industrial nations seeking resources and markets through conquest rather than trade. Domestically, the Supreme Court continues to dismantle New Deal programs. In January 1936, it strikes down the Agricultural Adjustment Act, ruling that Congress cannot regulate agricultural production. In May, it invalidates the Coal Conservation Act on similar grounds. Roosevelt responds with growing frustration, eventually proposing to expand the Supreme Court, adding up to 6 new justices to overcome the conservative majority. The court-packing plan becomes intensely controversial, seen by supporters as necessary to save the New Deal, and by critics as an attack on constitutional separation of powers. "Never thought I'd see Roosevelt overreach," comments Mr. Sullivan, suddenly supportive of the Supreme Court he previously criticized, trying to change the rules because he's losing the game. "The game is people's lives," you respond. "When the rules protect bank accounts instead of human beings, maybe they need changing." The debate plays out across America as the 1936 election approaches. Roosevelt faces Republican nominee Alf Landon, who opposes most New Deal programs as unconstitutional overreach while offering few alternatives for continued recovery. The campaign becomes a referendum on the New Deal itself, on government's expanded role in the economy, on the shift from laissez-faire individualism to managed capitalism with stronger social supports, on whether the Depression represents a temporary crisis or a fundamental flaw requiring structural change. Your own views have evolved since 1929. The experience of wandering America, witnessing suffering and resilience, working in fields and factories and shops has shaped a perspective more complex than any ideology. You see both the necessity of government intervention and its limitations, both the virtues of free enterprise and its excesses, both individual responsibility and systemic forces beyond individual control. These nuances aren't reflected in campaign rhetoric, which tends towards simplification and demonization. Roosevelt portrays his opponents as heartless defenders of privilege. Republicans portray the New Deal as the road to socialism. The middle ground, pragmatic problem-solving, evidence-based policy, balanced approaches, gets lost in partisan warfare. Despite these polarized narratives, your conversations with Sophie, with co-workers, with neighbors, reveal more sophisticated understanding among ordinary Americans. People recognize that complex problems rarely have simple solutions, that trade-offs are inevitable, that dogmatic positions serve political purposes rather than practical needs. In November, the election delivers a decisive verdict. Roosevelt wins in a historic landslide, carrying 46 of 48 states, Democrats expanding their majorities in both houses of Congress. It's an unambiguous endorsement of the New Deal approach, a rejection of pre-crash laissez-faire economics. The day after the election, you propose to Sophie, not with an expensive ring, such luxuries remain beyond reach, but with a simple question during a walk along the Salt River. "I don't have much," you acknowledge. "A small house, a used car, a job that's steady but not spectacular. But if you're willing to build something together," "Yes," she interrupts, smiling through tears. "Yes." The simplicity of the moment, of the commitment, reflects Depression-era values: directness, practicality, recognition that relationships rather than possessions provide true security. You set the wedding for spring, allowing time to save, to prepare, to plan a modest celebration suitable for still challenging times. The final months of 1936 bring implementation of one of the New Deal's most significant innovations, Social Security. The program begins collecting payroll taxes, though benefit payments won't start for several years. It represents perhaps the most fundamental shift in government's role, establishing permanent, universal protection against risks once considered purely individual responsibilities. "For 1% of my paycheck," grumbles a mechanic in your shop studying his reduced wages. "Government taking my money to give to someone else?" "No," you correct him. "Government taking your money now to give back to you when you're too old to work. Like insurance, except guaranteed." The concept remains controversial, seen as essential protection by some, as intrusive collectivism by others. But the program's basic premise, that industrial society requires mechanisms to manage risks beyond individual control, gradually gains acceptance across political divides. The year ends with America in significantly better condition than when Roosevelt first took office. Unemployment has dropped below 15%. Industrial production has returned to near pre-crash levels in many sectors. Banking operates under new regulations that have restored basic stability. Social supports prevent the most extreme forms of suffering that characterized the early Depression. Yet complete recovery remains elusive. Millions still lack work. Dust storms continue to devastate the plains. International trade remains far below pre-Depression levels. And beyond American borders, the global consequences of economic collapse continue to develop in increasingly dangerous directions. Or Spain is the next battleground, predicts Heinrich during a New Year's Eve gathering at your house. The Spanish Civil War has broken out between Republican forces and fascist rebels under Francisco Franco, becoming a proxy conflict between democratic and authoritarian visions. Germany and Italy send men and weapons to Franco. Heinrich continues, his accent still present, but his English much improved. They test their armies, their tactics, prepare for bigger wars. The connections between economic disaster and military conflict grow clearer each month. The Depression destabilized the international order, empowered extremists, pushed nations toward nationalism and autarky, created conditions where conquest seems a viable alternative to cooperation and trade. Yet America's path remains distinct, troubled, imperfect, but still democratic, still attempting to solve problems through reform rather than revolution or reaction. The contrast with developments in Europe and Asia becomes starker, the divergence more significant. As 1937 begins, your wedding plans accelerate. Sophie's parents will travel from New York, their first visit west, a journey made possible by Roosevelt's railroad regulations that have made passenger service affordable again. Your parents will come from Chicago, your first reunion since that brief visit in 1933. The ceremony will be at a small church where Sophie sometimes volunteers, teaching English to recent immigrants. The reception afterward at the community centre built by the WPA where she teaches her adult education classes. No extravagant dress, no lavish meal, no expensive gifts, but authentic celebration, genuine community, true commitment. In many ways, the wedding represents the personal parallel to national developments, not a return to pre-crash conditions, but adaptation to new realities, finding value in different places, building something sustainable if less materially abundant than once imagined. The Great Depression has permanently altered not just economics but consciousness, individual and collective. Material success seems less certain, less central. Interdependence is recognized rather than denied. Security requires both individual effort and systemic supports. Prosperity must be more widely shared to be sustainable. Whether these insights will survive eventual recovery, whether they'll shape post-Depression America, remains uncertain. The human tendency to forget hard lessons when times improve is powerful. The appeal of individualistic narratives in a culture built on frontier mythology is strong. But sitting on your porch on a cool January evening, discussing wedding details with Sophie, you feel something that would have seemed impossible in 1929. Not just hope for personal happiness, but faith in collective resilience, in the capacity to learn from disaster, to build systems less vulnerable to collapse, to balance individual freedom with mutual responsibility. The Depression isn't over. Its global consequences continue to unfold in increasingly dangerous ways, but its power to destroy has been contained, its worst effects mitigated, its challenges met with creativity and determination, if not perfect solutions. And on a personal level, you've not just survived but found meaning that transcends economic conditions, in community, in purpose, in connection. Whatever comes next, full recovery or new challenges, these foundations will remain, shaped by hardship but not defined by it. Spring 1937 arrives with wildflowers blooming across the desert and your wedding just weeks away. The modest house you've been renting now hums with activity as preparations accelerate. Sophie spends weekends sewing her own dress with help from the landlady of your old boarding house. You've built a small table for your home, working evenings in the construction company's woodshop with permission from Mr. Sullivan. "Never thought I'd see the day," Paul jokes while helping you sand the tabletop. "Remember that camp in Central Park? If someone had told you then that in 7 years you'd be getting married in Arizona, would have thought they were crazy," you finish, "or that I was hallucinating from hunger." These reflections on the journey from 1929 to 1937 become more frequent as the wedding approaches. Not just your personal journey, but the nation's, the world's. The distance travelled from economic collapse to partial recovery. The lessons learned, the adaptations made, the values shifted. Your parents arrive from Chicago 5 days before the wedding, your father looking older but healthier than during your brief visit in 1933, your mother beaming with joy despite the long journey. They bring news of family and neighborhood, cousins who found work through WPA projects, neighbors who've kept their homes thanks to federal mortgage protections, churches and community groups that have adapted to new realities. Your cousin Frank's working on the lakefront, your father reports. Parks Department through the WPA, planting trees, building paths, says it's the first steady work he's had since 30. And Mrs. Petrovich reopened the bakery, your mother adds. Small, just her working alone at first, but now she's got 2 helpers, named it after her husband. She doesn't need to explain. The same Mr. Petrovich who took his own life in 1931 when the bank foreclosed. These stories of resilience, of rebuilding from disaster, form a tapestry of national recovery, incomplete, uneven, but real. Not a return to pre-crash conditions, but adaptation to new realities, finding value in different places, building something sustainable if less materially abundant than once imagined. Sophie's parents arrive 2 days later, her father Antonio stern and traditional, her mother Maria warm and emotional. They've never been west of the Hudson, their entire lives contained within New York's Italian neighborhoods. The journey represents both physical and psychological distance traveled. So this is the desert, Antonio says, looking around skeptically as you drive them from the train station. No trees, no water. People really live here? It grows on you, you assure him, like New York must have grown on you when you first arrived from Italy. He nods grudgingly, seeing the parallel. New York was also strange at first, but had other Italians, familiar things. Here everything is different. Not everything, Sophie counters from the back seat, where she sits with her mother. People still need community, still help each other, still build lives together. These connections across differences, geographical, cultural, experiential, represent another depression lesson. Common humanity revealed through common suffering. Distinctions of region, ethnicity, religion becoming less significant than shared challenges, shared resilience. The wedding day dawns clear and mild. Perfect Arizona spring weather. The ceremony is simple but meaningful, held in a small church filled with friends from the boarding house, colleagues from work, students from Sophie's classes, neighbors who've become extended family. You exchange vows written together, reflecting journeys that brought you to this moment. Not just personal journeys, but historical ones. Sophie's parents coming from Italy to build new lives, your own migration across Depression-era America, the shared experience of economic collapse and tentative rebuilding. To find each other in a broken world, Sophie says, her voice steady despite tears, and choose to build something together. This is the greatest act of hope. The reception afterward at the WPA-built community centre is a true celebration. Food contributed by friends, music provided by local musicians who play for the joy of it, dancing that continues until late evening. Not lavish by pre-crash standards, but rich in community and connection in authentic joy. Your father, normally reserved, pulls you aside during a quiet moment. Proud of you, son. Not just this, he gestures towards Sophie, dancing with her mother, but everything, the way you've handled these years, many would have broken. Came close, you admit. More than once. He nods, understanding. That's why I'm proud. Bending without breaking, that's the real strength. The conversation captures something essential about the depression experience. Not just survival, but transformation. Learning to bend without breaking, finding strength in flexibility, in adaptation, in releasing old expectations while maintaining core values. After a brief honeymoon, 3 days in a borrowed cabin in the mountains north of Phoenix, you and Sophie return to normal life, or what passes for normal in 1937. Your jobs, your small house now shared, your community of friends and colleagues and neighbours. But within weeks, concerning news begins to appear. The stock market, which had been recovering steadily, suddenly drops sharply. Unemployment, which had been decreasing, begins to rise again. Industrial production slows, retail sales decline, construction projects are cancelled. What's being called the Roosevelt recession has begun, a significant downturn within the ongoing depression. The causes are complex and debated. Roosevelt's reduction of government spending in an attempt to balance the budget, the Federal Reserve's tightening of monetary policy, new Social Security taxes reducing consumer spending. Whatever the causes, the effects are immediate and troubling. At the construction company, government contracts are delayed or cancelled. Private projects disappear entirely. By June, Mr. Sullivan is reducing hours, cutting staff, struggling to maintain operations. Not firing you, he assures you during a difficult meeting, but have to cut back to 3 days a week. Maybe less if things get worse. The news hits hard, not just the economic impact, but the psychological blow. After years of gradual improvement, of building security step by tiny step, to face renewed uncertainty feels cruelly unfair. We'll be okay, Sophie says that night, studying household accounts at your small table. My teaching hours are steady. We can cut expenses. We've both lived through worse. She's right, of course. You have reserves now. Skills, savings, community, each other. Not prosperity by pre-crash standards, but far more security than in the darkest days of wandering jobless across America. But the setback raises deeper questions. Is full recovery even possible? Is the economy fundamentally broken, capable only of partial function, of temporary improvements before new collapses? Has capitalism as a system reached inherent limits that no policy adjustments can overcome? These questions circulate not just in your household, but across America as the recession deepens through summer and fall. Unemployment rises from 14% to nearly 19%. Industrial production drops by 30%. The stock market loses 50% of its value from 1937 highs. Roosevelt responds by abandoning budget-balancing efforts, pushing for renewed government spending, recommitting to the principle that recovery takes precedence over fiscal orthodoxy. Congress passes the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, providing additional funding for WPA projects. The recession becomes another front in the ongoing battle over government's proper role in economic life. Critics claim Roosevelt's policies caused the downturn. Supporters argue insufficient stimulus and premature budget cutting are to blame. The ideological divide that has characterized the entire Depression era deepens further. Through autumn, international news grows increasingly alarming. Japan launches full-scale war against China, capturing Shanghai, committing atrocities in Nanjing. Germany continues rearmament while oppressing its Jewish population through the Nuremberg laws. Italy solidifies its conquest of Ethiopia, joins with Germany and Japan in the Anti-Comintern Pact. These developments feel distant from daily life in Phoenix, but their connections to the Depression are undeniable and frequently discussed. Heinrich and Eva, the German refugees who've become close friends, provide perspective that makes international events visceral, immediate. All from economic disaster, Heinrich explains during dinner at your home one evening. Hitler promised jobs, food, national pride, delivered just enough to keep support, even as he took all freedoms, all decency. Could still happen here, Eva adds quietly. Depression not over. If recession becomes worse, if people lose hope again, the possibility hangs in the air, acknowledged but unspoken, that democracy remains vulnerable to economic failure, that authoritarianism retains its appeal when material needs go unmet, that the civilization you take for granted could collapse if recovery fails. Christmas 1937 is subdued compared to the previous year. Your reduced income means simpler gifts, more homemade items, careful budgeting. Sophie makes preserves from citrus grown in your small yard. You build a bookshelf from scrap lumber, practical presents reflecting renewed austerity. Yet the holiday gathering at your home, friends from the boarding house, co-workers, neighbours, Heinrich and Ava, Paul and Margaret, has a warmth, a genuine connection that no economic statistics can measure. The recession has reminded everyone how fragile recovery remains, how quickly progress can reverse, but also how much deeper security lies in relationships rather than material circumstances. To bending without breaking, Paul raises a glass during dinner, echoing your father's words from the wedding. Everyone drinks to the toast, recognizing its significance, its resonance with shared experience. The new year brings cautious optimism as Roosevelt's renewed spending begins taking effect. Your construction company secures additional government contracts, allowing return to full-time work by February. Sophie's adult education program expands again, adding vocational training for women entering the workforce in greater numbers. The recovery remains fragile, incomplete, but the worst of the Roosevelt recession appears to be passing. The pattern becomes familiar. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Progress interrupted by setbacks but not reversed entirely. Adaptation rather than restoration as the defining feature of economic life. March brings international news that overshadows domestic concerns. Hitler's Germany annexes Austria in the Anschluss, incorporating its German-speaking neighbour without firing a shot. The Western democracies, still struggling with economic recovery, offer no meaningful resistance. Next will be Czechoslovakia. Heinrich predicts grimly. German-speaking areas first, then the whole country. While your leaders talk, Hitler acts. The prediction proves accurate. By September, the Munich Agreement allows Germany to annex the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia's German-speaking regions, in exchange for Hitler's promise to make no further territorial demands. British Prime Minister Chamberlain returns from Munich, declaring, "Peace for our time." Peace? Eva scoffs when the news reaches Phoenix. They give Wolf 1 sheep, expect Wolf to become vegetarian. This is not peace. This is surrender. The international situation continues to deteriorate through 1938 and into 1939. Germany completes its takeover of Czechoslovakia, directly contradicting Hitler's Munich promises. Italy invades Albania. Japan expands its control in China. The march toward global conflict accelerates while the Western democracies, still recovering from economic disaster, respond with appeasement and delay. Yet domestic recovery continues despite international tensions. By mid-1939, unemployment has dropped back below 15%. Industrial production approaches pre-crash levels in many sectors. New Deal programs, from social security to banking regulations, from labor protections to agricultural supports, have created a framework for managed capitalism that provides greater stability, if not prosperity. Your own situation reflects these national trends. The construction company not only returns to full operations, but expands, opening a second location across town. Your position as shop foreman brings promotion to general manager of mechanical operations, overseeing maintenance for a growing fleet of vehicles and equipment. Sophie's work evolves too, from basic adult education to administration of multiple programs across Phoenix. Her language skills prove valuable with the increasing number of refugees arriving from Europe, needing not just English instruction, but assistance navigating American systems, finding employment, establishing new lives. Your small house gains modest improvements, a proper kitchen remodeled on weekends with help from construction company colleagues, a garden that produces vegetables year-round in Arizona's climate, a spare bedroom that serves as Sophie's office, and, perhaps someday, a nursery. Not what I imagined when we were younger, Sophie remarks one evening, sitting on the porch watching sunset paint the desert in gold and purple. Before the crash, I mean, had such different pictures of success, of what life should be. Better or worse, you ask, genuinely curious. Your own assessment varies day to day, moment to moment. She considers watching a cactus wren dart between thorny branches. Different, smaller in some ways, bigger in others. Less stuff, but more substance, connection, hard to explain. Material expectations lowered, other values raised, you suggest? Exactly. And not just us. Whole country, maybe world. Depression burned away some illusions. Painful, but clarifying. The conversation captures something essential about the Depression decade, not just economic disaster, but consciousness transformation, material success less certain, less central, interdependence recognized rather than denied, security understood as requiring both individual effort and systemic supports, prosperity seen as needing to be widely shared to be sustainable. Whether these insights will survive eventual recovery, whether they'll shape post-Depression America permanently or temporarily, remains uncertain. The human tendency to forget hard lessons when times improve is powerful. The appeal of individualistic narratives in a culture built on frontier mythology is strong. But sitting on your porch as 1939 progresses, these philosophical questions increasingly give way to more immediate concerns. War, which has seemed a distant threat, an abstract possibility, suddenly becomes concrete reality. September 1st brings news that Germany has invaded Poland, ignoring Western warnings, beginning what will become the Second World War. Britain and France declare war on Germany 2 days later, fulfilling their guarantees to Poland, but too late to prevent its swift defeat. The news reaches Phoenix through radio bulletins, newspaper headlines, telegrams from relatives in Europe. The community centre where Sophie works becomes an informal gathering place as people seek information, perspective, mutual support in processing events that seem simultaneously distant and world-changing. "We knew it was coming," Heinrich says during one such gathering, his voice heavy. "Since 1933, every step leading here, depression creating conditions, weakening resistance, making people desperate enough to follow madmen. The direct line from economic collapse to military conflict, from the stock market crash of 1929 to the invasion of Poland in 1939, becomes impossible to deny. The Great Depression has culminated in global war, not as an accident or coincidence, but through clear causal connections. Economic nationalism led to protectionism, led to autarky, led to expansionism, led to conquest. America remains officially neutral as 1939 draws to a close, but few believe this can last indefinitely. Roosevelt begins cautious preparations, increasing military budgets, expanding the draft, providing aid to Britain short of direct intervention. The economy responds with accelerating production, declining unemployment, increasing wages. The irony is bitterly noted that war preparations accomplish what years of peacetime policy could not fully achieve. That economic recovery comes through manufacturing the tools of destruction. That full employment arrives by preparing young men to fight and possibly die overseas. "Never figured it would end this way," Paul comments during Sunday dinner at your home in December 1939. Depression ending because of war, like curing a disease by catching something worse. The observation resonates around the table. The depression isn't over. Not yet, not completely, but its end is becoming visible on the horizon, not through natural recovery or policy intervention alone, but through the massive industrial mobilization that only global conflict seems able to generate. "Worth it?" asks Margaret, Paul's wife, now pregnant with their first child. "Recovery at such a price?" No one answers directly. The question is too complex, too loaded with values, with assumptions, with weighing of different forms of suffering. But Heinrich, who has experienced both economic disaster and fascist brutality firsthand, offers a perspective that silences further debate. "War was coming regardless," he says quietly. "Depression made it inevitable. Question now is not whether price is worth paying, but how to ensure sacrifice has meaning. That better world comes after." As 1940 begins, this becomes the central question, not just for your household, your community, your nation, but for a world poised between economic disaster and military catastrophe. How to ensure that sacrifice has meaning, that better world comes after. The Great Depression's direct economic impacts are fading, gradually replaced by the demands and distortions of wartime production. But its deeper lessons remain about systemic vulnerabilities, about human resilience, about the necessity of balancing individual freedom with collective security, about the fragility of prosperity and the centrality of shared values. Whether these lessons will shape the post-war world, whether the suffering of the Depression decade will produce lasting reforms or be forgotten in new prosperity, remains to be seen. But sitting on your porch as winter stars emerge above the desert, you and Sophie share a quiet certainty that whatever comes next, the experiences of these years have permanently altered not just economic structures but human consciousness itself. And that, perhaps, is the Depression's most enduring legacy. Not just what it destroyed, but what it revealed. Not just what was lost, but what was found within the ruins. Spring 1940 brings change to Phoenix. Subtle at first, then increasingly visible. Manufacturing plants expand operations. Construction accelerates. Help-wanted signs appear in windows that for years displayed only "no jobs available." Military recruiters set up tables downtown. It's not prosperity exactly, not yet, but unmistakable economic activity driven by war preparations, by government contracts for equipment, vehicles, supplies, by European orders for American goods paid for with whatever credit remains available to nations under siege. Your construction company pivots toward military-adjacent projects, expanding an airfield outside Phoenix, building warehouses for equipment storage, constructing barracks for training facilities. The work is steady, the pay better than anything since before the crash. "Ironic, isn't it?" Mr. Sullivan remarks during a site inspection in April. "Spent 10 years trying to recover from one disaster. finally succeeding because of another. The observation captures the bitter reality of the Depression's end, not through natural recovery or policy intervention alone, but through the massive industrial mobilization that only global conflict generates. Full employment arrives as a byproduct of preparing for destruction on an unprecedented scale. May brings the German Blitzkrieg, lightning war that conquers Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and finally France in a series of stunning victories. Western Europe, democratic and market-oriented, falls to fascist dictatorship in weeks rather than the years of trench warfare that characterized the previous conflict. They're not stopping there, Heinrich predicts during a community meeting at the centre where Sophie works. Britain next, then east toward Russia, and while America debates, Hitler conquers. The debate over American involvement intensifies as Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. Roosevelt provides aid through the Lend-Lease program, effectively making the US the arsenal of democracy while maintaining technical neutrality. Isolationists and interventionists battle for public opinion, each claiming to represent true American values. For ordinary citizens, these global events manifest in accelerating economic changes. Consumer goods become scarcer as factories convert to military production. Voluntary conservation programs begin. Metal drives, rubber collection, reduced use of strategic materials. Price controls and rationing are discussed as potential necessities if America enters the war directly. Your own work evolves with these changes. The mechanical shop now services not just construction equipment, but military vehicles sent for repair from nearby bases. Your team expands to 20 men, including several recruited from Sophie's vocational training programs. Older workers transitioning to new skills, women entering traditionally male occupations, refugees bringing technical knowledge from Europe. "Never thought I'd see women as mechanics," comments Frank, your longtime assistant who now manages daily operations while you handle broader coordination. "My mother built artillery shells in the last war," you remind him, "while men fought overseas, might happen again on an even larger scale." The integration of women into the workforce represents another transformation accelerated by crisis. What began as economic necessity during the Depression, women seeking any available income to support families, becomes patriotic duty as war approaches. Old barriers fall not through gradual social evolution, but urgent practical need. June brings personal news that overshadows even the international situation. Sophie is pregnant. The announcement comes one evening as you sit on the porch listening to radio reports of German bombers over London. "Wanted to be sure before telling you," she explains, her expression mixing joy and concern. "Doctor confirmed yesterday, due around January." The news elicits complicated emotions: happiness, excitement, fear for what kind of world this child will enter. A decade of economic disaster, potentially culminating in global war, hardly seems the optimal environment for beginning a family. Timing could be better, you acknowledge, putting an arm around Sophie. But people have been having babies through the whole Depression, through every war and disaster in history. "Well, life continues," she agrees. "Has to. Otherwise, what's the point of anything else?" The pregnancy brings adjustments to your routines, your plans, your thinking about the future. The spare room that served as Sophie's office is converted to a nursery painted on weekends with help from friends. You take on extra work, supervising weekend shifts to save additional money. Sophie continues teaching, but reduces administrative responsibilities, focusing on direct classroom instruction. The local community embraces the news with enthusiasm. Friends organising a baby shower, neighbours offering hand-me-down cribs and high chairs, colleagues presenting handmade toys and knitted blankets after a decade where collective hardship created deeper connections. This celebration of new life represents hope, continuity, faith in tomorrow despite today's uncertainties. Summer brings further war news, the Battle of Britain raging in the skies over England, Hitler preparing Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union, Japan expanding its holdings in Asia while eyeing resource-rich European colonies like the Dutch East Indies. America's economy continues transitioning toward war footing even as official neutrality remains. The first peacetime draft in American history begins, calling up men for military service. Defense spending increases exponentially. Strategic industries receive priority for raw materials, for transportation, for labor. Your construction company now operates almost exclusively on military contracts, building or expanding training facilities, airfields, supply depots across Arizona. The work is plentiful but increasingly regulated, with material allocations, wage controls, production schedules overseen by government agencies created to maximize efficiency. So much for free enterprise, Mr. Sullivan grumbles during a meeting with procurement officers. Might as well be working for the government directly. We are, essentially, you remind him, just with the illusion of independence. This partnership between government and private enterprise, neither pure capitalism nor state socialism but a managed system addressing national needs, represents the culmination of trends that began with the New Deal. Crisis, first economic, then military, has transformed American governance, business operations, labor relations, social supports in ways that would have been unimaginable before the crash. Whether these changes will endure beyond the emergencies that produced them remains an open question, debated in newspapers, radio programs, community meetings, dinner conversations. Will America return to pre-depression arrangements once prosperity returns? Or has a new economic order emerged, more regulated, more security-conscious, more collectively oriented? The questions persist as 1940 progresses toward winter, as Sophie's pregnancy advances, as the war in Europe intensifies. In November, Roosevelt wins an unprecedented third term as president, largely on his handling of both the Depression and pre-war preparations. The vote represents continued endorsement of active government, of collective approaches to national challenges, of leadership through ongoing crisis. December brings two significant developments, one personal, one global. Sophie experiences false labor, a frightening episode that resolves without complications but prompts the doctor to order bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. You reorganize work schedules, recruit neighbors to help with household tasks, spend evenings reading to Sophie as she rests. Then, on December 7th, the global situation erupts into American life with shocking immediacy. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, killing thousands, destroying much of the Pacific Fleet, pulling the United States directly into World War II. We knew it was coming, Paul says when you gather with friends to listen to Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech requesting war declarations. Not exactly how or when, but that we'd be pulled in eventually. America's official entry into the war accelerates transitions already underway. Rationing becomes mandatory rather than voluntary. Production shifts completely to military needs. Conservation becomes patriotic duty rather than economic necessity. The last vestiges of the Depression disappear not through natural recovery, but through the artificial stimulus of war mobilization. January 1941 brings the arrival of your daughter, Elizabeth Maria, named for your mother and Sophie's. The birth is difficult but uncomplicated, Sophie recovering quickly, the baby healthy, despite being slightly premature. She has your eyes, Sophie says, as you hold your daughter for the first time. This tiny being somehow both fragile and resilient, and maybe my mother's chin. Definitely your determination, you add as the infant grips your finger with surprising strength. Going to need that in this world. The world Elizabeth enters is shaped by both depression and war, materially constrained but rich in community, facing unprecedented dangers but unified in purpose, economically active but focused on necessities rather than luxuries. It's a world where collective effort has largely replaced individual striving as the dominant ethos, where security concerns outweigh freedom maximization, where sacrifice for common good is expected rather than exceptional. Whether these conditions represent temporary emergency measures or permanent societal shift remains uncertain. Whether post-war America will resemble pre-Depression America or something entirely new is actively debated in government offices, factory floors, community centers, family dinner tables. The America I grew up in is gone, your father writes in a letter congratulating you on Elizabeth's birth, not just because of war, but because the Depression changed how we think about everything. Work, money, government, each other. Maybe for the better, time will tell. His observation resonates with your own experience. The sense that beyond economic statistics, beyond policy changes, beyond institutional reforms, the Depression's most profound impact has been psychological and philosophical. A fundamental reassessment of values, of priorities, of what constitutes security, success, community, purpose. As 1941 progresses, these reflections take back seat to more immediate concerns: raising an infant during wartime, managing expanding work responsibilities as military production accelerates, supporting friends and neighbors affected by rationing, conscription, wartime relocations. Your construction company transitions to building infrastructure supporting the war effort, not just in Arizona, but across the Southwest. You find yourself traveling frequently, overseeing mechanical operations at multiple sites, balancing professional demands with family responsibilities in ways that challenge traditional gender roles. Never imagined this arrangement, Sophie admits one evening after you return from a week in New Mexico. She's continued teaching part-time while caring for Elizabeth with help from a rotating network of friends and neighbors. Me working outside the home, you traveling for work, everyone pitching in with the baby. Depression baby, war baby, you reply, watching your daughter sleep peacefully despite air raid sirens being tested outside. She's getting early lessons in adaptation. The observation applies beyond your household to communities, institutions, governance structures continuing to evolve through cascading crises. What began as emergency responses to economic collapse have become standard operating procedures, then foundations for war mobilization, then potential templates for post-war society. By summer 1941, unemployment has effectively disappeared from 25% at the Depression's height to under 1% as wartime production absorbs all available workers. Wages rise, working conditions improve, labor unions gain unprecedented strength as national need for uninterrupted production outweighs traditional management resistance. Yet material prosperity remains constrained despite full employment. Consumer goods are scarce, rationing limits purchases, savings increase by necessity rather than choice. The psychological scars of the Depression persist in spending patterns, in risk assessment, in household financial management, thrift and caution outlasting the economic conditions that produced them. Funny thing, remarks Frank during lunch at a work site in Tucson. Finally got steady work, decent pay, but can't buy what I want anyway. Cars rationed, gas is rationed, meat's rationed, money in my pocket but nothing to spend it on. Saving for after though, responds another worker. Got 3 war bonds already, never had savings before in my life. This forced deferred consumption, earning now for spending later, creates potential for post-war boom, but also risks if peacetime production can't absorb pent-up demand. Economists, politicians, business leaders already debate post-war planning even as the conflict expands across Europe, Africa, Asia, the Pacific. The question underlying these debates remains consistent. Will America return to pre-depression arrangements once prosperity returns? Or has a new economic order emerged, more regulated, more security-conscious, more collectively oriented? Will the lessons of economic collapse be remembered when artificial stimulus of war spending eventually ends? By late 1941, your own family has achieved stability that would have seemed miraculous during the Depression's darkest days. Your position managing mechanical operations across multiple construction sites provides steady income above national averages. Sophie's teaching, though part-time while Elizabeth is young, adds supplementary earnings. The small house has gained modest improvements, indoor plumbing upgraded, roof repaired, yard landscaped with native plants requiring minimal water. Not what we dreamed of before the crash, you reflect one evening, sitting with Sophie on the porch as desert sunset paints the mountains gold and purple. Elizabeth sleeps in her mother's arms, oblivious to the world historic events surrounding her infancy, but good in different ways. More real, Sophie suggests, built on something solid, not just money and things, but community, purpose, knowing we can survive when systems fail. The observation captures something essential about depression experiences, not just economic hardship, but consciousness transformation, material success less certain, less central, interdependence recognized rather than denied, security understood as requiring both individual effort and systemic supports, prosperity seen as needing to be widely shared to be sustainable. Whether these insights will endure, whether they'll shape post-war America permanently or temporarily, remains uncertain as 1941 draws to a close. The human tendency to forget hard lessons when times improve is powerful. The appeal of individualistic narratives in a culture built on frontier mythology is strong. But the Depression's legacy, both institutional and psychological, has created foundations for potentially lasting change. Banking regulations that prevent speculation-driven collapse, social security providing basic protection against poverty in old age, labor laws establishing minimum standards for wages, hours, working conditions, recognition that market economies require management to prevent extreme outcomes, that individual freedom functions best within systems ensuring basic security. Beyond policy, beyond statistics, beyond institutional arrangements, the Depression decade has permanently altered how millions understand themselves, their relationships, their place in economic and social systems, not erasing American individualism, but tempering it with recognition of interdependence, not rejecting market economies, but acknowledging their limitations, not abandoning personal responsibility, but placing it within broader contexts of systemic forces beyond individual control. As night falls over Phoenix, stars emerging in desert skies of remarkable clarity, you wonder what world Elizabeth will inherit when peace eventually returns. Not the world that existed before 1929, certainly, that America, prosperous but fragile, individualistic, to the point of delusion, trusting in markets as self-correcting, disappeared into Black Thursday's abyss, into breadlines and Hoovervilles, into dust storms and bank failures. Nor the world of 1941, shaped by emergency responses to cascading crises operating under wartime constraints unified by external threats, that America, fully employed but materially limited, collectively oriented but freedom restricted, purpose-driven but danger threatened, or more again when peace returns, when soldiers come home, when factories convert back to civilian production. Something new will emerge, neither pre-depression nor wartime America, but synthesis incorporating lessons from both, an America shaped by memory of economic collapse and recognition of interdependence, yet still committed to individual opportunity and market innovation. An economy managed to prevent extremes of boom and bust while preserving space for entrepreneurship and personal advancement. A society balancing security and freedom rather than treating them as zero-sum opposites. At least that's the hope cradled as gently as the sleeping child in Sophie's arms. That suffering serves purpose, that hardship teaches wisdom, that civilization learns from its catastrophes rather than simply repeating them in different forms. Whether this hope proves justified remains for history to determine, but sitting on your porch as winter stars wheel overhead, your family safe after years of uncertainty, your community strong after decade of challenges, your nation unified after period of bitter division, you feel something that transcends optimism or pessimism, a quiet faith in human resilience, in collective adaptation, in capacity to rebuild from ruins something better than what came before. And perhaps that's the Depression's most enduring legacy. Not just what it destroyed, but what it revealed. Not just what was lost, but what was found within the ruins. Not just lessons about economic systems, but insights into human nature itself, our vulnerabilities and our strengths, our capacities for both selfishness and solidarity, our ability to bend without breaking when everything we thought permanent proves fragile. As you take Elizabeth from Sophie's arms, carrying the sleeping child to her crib, these reflections blur into something simpler, more immediate: gratitude for having survived, for having found purpose beyond survival, for having built connections that transcend economic conditions. The Great Depression changed everything: economics, politics, international relations, social structures, but its deepest transformations occurred within human consciousness itself, altering how millions understand themselves and their relationships to each other, to institutions, to the broader systems shaping their lives. And as you drift towards sleep in your modest Phoenix home, these transformations, personal and collective, individual and societal, echo in dreams that span from Hooverville to White House, from breadlines to battle lines, from dust storms to factory floors. Dreams of a world forever changed by economic disaster, yet still moving forward, still adapting, still finding meaning within hardship, still building something new from the ashes of what came before.